My name is Marisol Navarro. I am 34 years old, and I used to believe that if you worked hard enough inside a family, if you showed up every single time and never asked for anything back, the family would eventually see you. I was wrong. I learned that the night my brother's hand closed around my wig at my own wedding reception, and my father sat 12 feet away and did not move. But I need to start before that. I need to start 7 years earlier, in a storage room that smelled like motor oil and old cardboard, because that is where this story actually begins. Not at a wedding table with white roses and my mother's laughter, but in a building my father told me I would never be capable of running. My father, Ernesto Navarro, built Navarro Fleet Services from a single-used truck he bought at a county auction in 1987. He was 26 years old. He had $400 in his checking account and a brother-in-law who owed him a favor, and by the time I was born he had turned that one truck into a regional commercial fleet operation. 12 vehicles, a maintenance contract with 2 mid-sized grocery distribution companies, and a leased yard in the industrial corridor outside of Fresno, California. He told that story at every dinner table, every holiday, every extended family gathering I can remember. He told it with the same words in the same order every time, and everyone at the table nodded in the same places, and my brother Tomas would lean back in his chair and look proud as though he had driven that original truck himself. I want to ask you something before I go further, and I mean this genuinely. If you have ever worked inside a family business, if you have ever given years of yourself to something that was supposed to belong to all of you, and then watched someone else treat it as though the whole thing was theirs by birthright, I want you to stay with me through this. Because what happened to me did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened slowly, over years, in 100 small rooms where I was told in careful, reasonable-sounding language that I did not quite belong at the table where the real decisions were made. I grew up understanding that Navarro Fleet Services was the center of everything. It sent both of us to college, though Tomas went to a 4-year university in San Diego with a meal plan and a single dorm room, and I went to Fresno State and commuted 40 minutes each way because my father said the business needed cash that year. I told myself it was fine. I told myself a lot of things were fine in those years because the alternative was admitting that the math of our household did not add up equally. I studied business administration. I took every logistics elective the department offered. I wrote my senior thesis on route optimization in regional freight operations, and my faculty advisor, a retired operations director named Dr. Patricia Home, told me it was the most practically grounded undergraduate thesis she had reviewed in 11 years of teaching. I kept that comment in a file folder in my desk at home for a long time after that. I took it out occasionally and read it when I needed to remember that my understanding of this industry was real, that it had been evaluated by someone with no reason to be kind to me. I graduated in May. By June I was working at the yard full-time, doing what my father called learning the operation from the ground up. I inventoried parts. I reconciled fuel receipts. I sat with the dispatch logs at 6 in the morning and cross-referenced them against the maintenance records because no one else had built a system for doing that, and the discrepancies were costing the company between $800 and $1,200 a month in unbilled service hours. I found that problem in my 3rd week. I built a tracking spreadsheet, implemented a flagging system, and presented it to my father with a printed summary and 3 months of projected savings. He looked at the summary for a moment. Then he set it on the corner of his desk. "Good," he said. "Keep doing that." Tomas had been at the company for 8 months by then, and he was already sitting in on the client meetings. He was already the one my father introduced to the grocery chain representative who came through in July. I watched that introduction happen from the doorway of the dispatch office. My father put his hand on Tomas's shoulder and said, "This is my son. He's going to be running things with me." I squared the papers in front of me and went back to the fuel receipts. The first time my father made his position fully clear, not implied, not softened by the usual family logic warmth, but stated in a room full of people, was at Tomas's birthday dinner in October of that same year. My mother, Gloria, had reserved the back room at a restaurant called Casa Medina in northwest Fresno, a place the family used for every significant occasion. There were 18 people at the long table: aunts, uncles, cousins, my father's oldest business contact and his wife, and Tomas's girlfriend at the time, a woman named Renata who laughed at everything my father said, which he appeared to appreciate deeply. I had come directly from the yard. I had spent that Saturday running a full compliance check on the vehicle maintenance logs because our largest distribution client, Cielo Fresh, had sent a notice indicating they were reviewing the terms of their contract and wanted updated documentation by the following Friday. No one had asked me to do the compliance check. I had read the notice, understood what it meant, pulled the logs, and started working. I arrived at Casa Medina at 6:15 with the preliminary summary in my bag because I thought my father might want to discuss it before Monday. My father was at the head of the table. Tomas was 2 seats to his left. There was a gap where I found my place card between my cousin Dolores and my uncle Federico, which put me at the far curve of the table, closer to the wall than to my father. The conversation moved the way it always moved at these dinners. Stories about the early years of the business, a slow drift toward talk of expansion, my father's voice carrying over everything else. At some point, my uncle Tio Bernardo asked about the Cielo Fresh contract. "We're in good shape," my father said. Tomas has been working on the relationship. Tomas had not been to the yard that Saturday. His truck had not been in the lot when I arrived at 8 in the morning. I said, "I pulled the maintenance logs today. There are 3 vehicles flagged for documentation gaps that the notice specifically references. I started the remediation summary. It should be clean by Wednesday." There was a brief pause. The kind that lasts only 2 or 3 seconds but that you feel in the back of your jaw. My father looked at me. Then he looked back at Tio Bernardo. "Marisol handles the paperwork side of things," he said. "She's good with the administrative detail." Tio Bernardo nodded and moved on to something else, and the conversation folded back over itself, and I was left sitting there with the word paperwork settling over everything I had spent that Saturday doing. My mother touched my aunt's arm about something and laughed. I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. After dinner, my cousin Dolores leaned toward me and said quietly, "You do a lot for that company." I said, "It's a family business." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "That's not what I meant." I knew what she meant. I had known for months. But naming it out loud inside that room, with my father 6 seats away still talking about Tomas's future, felt like a door I was not ready to open yet. My throat felt tight in a way I had learned to recognize. That specific pressure behind the collarbone that meant I was holding something too large for the space I was in. I folded my napkin into a smaller square and said nothing. What came over the following weeks was not a single incident but a settled pattern. I processed the documentation. I handled the compliance remediation for Cielo Fresh. All of it, the flagged vehicles corrected, the updated logs formatted and submitted 4 days before the deadline, and when the contract renewal came through in December at an increased rate, my father announced it at the next family dinner as a win for the business, and he looked at Tomas when he said it. It began, as best as I can trace it, when I was 19 years old and Tomas was 22. My father had taken Tomas to a regional trucking association meeting in Bakersfield on a Thursday in March. I was home from college for spring break and I had offered to come along. I had been studying logistics for 2 semesters. I had questions I wanted to ask the people in that room. My father was standing at the kitchen counter with a coffee cup in his hand when I asked. He looked at me with a settled certainty, as though he had already resolved a question I had not yet finished asking. "It's going to be a long day," he said. "A lot of business talk. You'd be bored." I was a logistics student who had spent the prior week reading a 340-page textbook on freight contract structures. I would not have been bored. But I said okay, and Tomas and my father left at 7:15 the next morning while I sat at the kitchen table with my textbook and a bowl of cereal that I did not finish. There were others. The summer I was 21, I spent 6 weeks reorganizing the parts inventory at the yard. The previous system was paper-based, and there were parts being ordered twice, parts being paid for that were never received, a recurring overcharge from one supplier that totaled, when I went back through 3 years of invoices, just under $9,000 in duplicate billings. I documented everything and gave the folder to my father. He recovered the $9,000. He renegotiated the terms with the supplier. He mentioned at a family barbecue that Tomas had been doing good work tightening up the vendor relationships. Tomas had been in San Diego that summer. I kept working. I managed the carrier compliance filings for 2 consecutive renewal cycles, submitted on time, no deficiencies, while finishing my degree and commuting 40 minutes each way. I sourced a maintenance software platform in my final semester and built the implementation case from scratch, modeling the cost against 3 years of our own maintenance data. The platform was adopted the year after I graduated and reduced unscheduled downtime by roughly 18% in its first operating year. My father told the Cielo Fresh account manager that the operational improvements were the result of better leadership at the management level. Tomas had been promoted to operations manager 4 months prior. I rebuilt the dispatch scheduling system after a routing error caused a missed delivery window that cost us a $14,000 penalty clause. The error had originated in a process that predated me. I found it, traced it, fixed it, and implemented a verification protocol that prevented it from recurring. My father reviewed the revised protocol and said it looked solid. He did not ask who had built it. I turned 26 in January of the year I was diagnosed. The diagnosis was breast cancer, caught at stage 2 during a routine screening. I told my parents on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in their living room. My father's first question after the initial silence was how the treatment schedule would affect my availability at the yard. I looked at the lamp on the side table next to his chair, a brass lamp with a cream shade that had been in that living room my entire life, and I looked at it for a long time before I answered. "I'll manage the schedule," I said. My mother said, "We should pray." Tomas, who was not present, texted me that evening, "Rough news. You're tough though." I kept showing up to the yard. I ran my treatment appointments on Tuesday and Friday mornings and was at my desk by 1 o'clock on those days. I wore a wig beginning in the 4th week of treatment because I could not afford, emotionally, professionally, in the specific geography of that office, to be visibly ill in a place where I had spent years trying to be seen as competent. The wig was a good one. Dark brown, close to my natural color, professional. No one at the yard mentioned it. No one at the yard asked about my health in any sustained way after the first week. My father did not adjust my workload. He said twice in that period that he appreciated my dedication, both times on his way to or from somewhere else. I saved every document from those months. Every routing record, every compliance filing, every email chain I managed while sitting in a treatment chair with a laptop balanced on my knees. I saved them in a folder on an external drive that I kept at home, not at the yard. I had not decided what to do with them yet. I only knew I needed them to exist somewhere that was entirely mine. Marco Vasquez and I had been together for 3 years when he proposed at a small restaurant in downtown Fresno on a Tuesday evening in November. He was a civil engineer, steady and precise and genuinely kind in a way that I had not understood was available to me until I met him. He had driven me to 4 treatment appointments when my own car was in the shop and sat in the waiting room with a book and a thermos of coffee and never once made me feel like a burden. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We set the date for the following September. Long enough for me to be fully through treatment, fully into remission, fully present for the day in a way that mattered to me. The venue was a vineyard property called Silverado Ranch outside of Madera, rented event space with a covered outdoor pavilion and a reception hall that seated 120 guests comfortably. Marco and I paid for most of the wedding ourselves. My parents contributed $2,000 in the spring, which my mother presented at a Sunday dinner as a significant gesture, and I thanked her for it with the same care I gave to everything in that house. In the months between the engagement and the wedding, my father restructured the operations management role. Tomas's title changed from operations manager to director of operations, which came with a salary increase and a formal expansion of his decision-making authority. My father announced this at a staff meeting in February. I sat in the 3rd row. I had been the one to prepare the performance benchmarking report that formed the basis of the restructuring recommendation. After the staff meeting, I asked my father if we could speak privately. We went to his office and he closed the door. "I put the benchmarking report together," I said. "I want to understand what my path looks like in the restructured organization." He sat down behind his desk, quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was about to say something he had already decided. "You're essential, Marisol," he said. "You know that. The operational detail work, nobody does it better. I need you where you are." "Where I am is not a titled position," I said. We'll talk about titles, he said. Give it some time. I asked how much time. He said, let's get through the busy season. I had been hearing variations of let's get through for 6 years. Through the contract renewal. Through the compliance cycle. Through the software implementation. Through my cancer treatment. I squared the papers in front of me. I had brought the benchmarking report, my copy, and I set it on the edge of his desk without saying anything further. Then I left his office and went back to mine. I called an attorney that week. Her name was Patricia Osei, and she specialized in business law with a focus on partnership disputes and closely held company structures. I had found her through the State Bar Referral Service, chosen because her firm's case history included 3 successful resolutions involving family-owned operations and contested equity claims. I did not tell anyone I made that call. When I told Marco 2 weeks later, he sat quietly and then said, "Okay. What do you need from me?" I needed the records I had been saving for 6 years. I needed Patricia Osei to look at what I had built and tell me what it was worth in a legal framework. The same precise and documented certainty I had felt when I found the $9,000 in duplicate billings. Patricia's assessment came back in March. I read it twice at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening with Marco next to me. Then I put it in a manila envelope, placed the envelope inside the external drive case, and locked it in the box I kept in my home office closet. I did not touch it again for 6 months. The wedding was on a Saturday in September. Marco's family drove up from Bakersfield. My father arrived in the dark gray sedan he kept polished for important occasions and walked into the vineyard event space like a man who owned the afternoon. My mother wore pale green and kissed my cheek at the door. Tomas arrived 40 minutes late with his new girlfriend, and the ceremony's start was delayed 30 minutes to accommodate them because my mother had asked the officiant to wait. I stood in the bridal suite and waited. I was in my dress. My wig was pinned and set. I had checked it 3 times in the mirror because I still, 14 months after treatment, carried that specific self-consciousness, the awareness that it was there, that it could come undone, that it was the most visible evidence of the year that had taken the most from me. Marco's face when I came down the aisle made all of it go quiet. The ceremony was 22 minutes. We wrote our own vows. Marco's hands were warm when he held mine, and his voice did not waver once, and I thought, standing there with the September light coming through the pavilion screens, that this was the truest I had felt inside my own life in longer than I could remember. The reception moved into the hall. Dinner was served. My mother spoke for 7 minutes about her own marriage and mentioned me twice. My father did not give a toast. The dancing started. Marco and I had our first dance, and I let myself be entirely in that moment without thinking about anything else. The second song ended. The DJ transitioned to something faster, and I stepped back toward our table to set down my glass. I did not see Tomas until he was already beside me. "You look like you're pretending," he said. His voice was low, with the particular evenness of someone who has rehearsed a cruelty until it sounds casual. I turned to look at him. "Pretending to be what?" I said. He smiled, the smile he had used since we were children when he wanted to communicate that he knew something I didn't. "A bride," he said. "A whole person. You know." My pulse caught, one sharp beat high in my chest, before I understood what he was reaching for. I said, "Tomas." And then his hand moved. One motion, fingers catching the back edge of the wig, and before I could process what was happening it was gone. Pulled free, held up, visible to everyone within a 30-foot radius, which on a venue floor that size was most of the room. The music kept playing for 4 more seconds. Then it cut off. In the silence that followed, my mother's voice came from the family table, clear and carrying, wearing the same warmth it wore at every dinner I had ever sat through. "Let him see what she really is," she said. "The groom deserves a real woman." I stood in the center of the reception hall of my own wedding with the September air on my bare scalp, and the faces of 111 people turned toward me, and I did not move. My father sat at the family table 12 feet away. His hands were folded in front of him. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked away. Nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Marco was at my side before I had finished processing what had just occurred. He put his hand on my arm and positioned himself between me and Tomas in a way that was not aggressive but was entirely clear. His best friend said something quiet to the DJ, and within 30 seconds a low instrumental track came back through the speakers, soft enough to give people somewhere to put their eyes. Tomas still had the wig in his hand. My father had not moved from his chair. I looked at Tomas. His smile had shifted into something more uncertain now that the room had not responded the way he appeared to have expected. My mother was still seated at the family table, her expression arranged into the composure she used when she wanted to communicate that nothing unusual was occurring. I said, "Set it down." Tomas looked at me. Then he looked at my father, the way he had been looking at my father for his entire adult life to confirm whether a thing he had done was correct. My father looked at the table. Tomas set the wig on the edge of the nearest empty chair. I walked to it. I picked it up. I took it to the bridal suite and I stood in front of the mirror and pinned it back into place with the same deliberate care I had used that morning, and then I stood there for an additional 60 seconds and breathed. Marco knocked on the door at the 45-second mark. I told him I needed 1 more minute. He said okay and waited outside the door. When I came back out, he was leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at me with the specific steadiness that I had understood by then was simply who he was. "We have a reception to finish," I said. "We do," he said. We went back in. We finished the reception. I danced 3 more songs. I cut the cake with Marco's hand over mine. I talked to his aunts and his college roommate and a neighbor of his parents who had driven 4 hours to be there, and I was present for every one of those conversations, because the alternative was to let what Tomas had done become the event of the evening, and I had decided it was not going to be the event of the evening. What it was going to be was something else. I called Patricia Osei on the Monday after the wedding. I told her I was ready to move. She said she had been ready for 6 weeks. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in October, 6 weeks after the wedding. Patricia's office was in a mid-rise building in downtown Fresno, 10th floor, conference room that looked west toward the valley. I arrived at 2 o'clock. The materials I had delivered the prior week were organized on the table in 2 sets of folders. My father arrived at 2:15 wearing the dark gray blazer he used for important occasions. He saw me at the table and stopped. "What is this?" he said. It was not a question. "Sit down, Dad," I said. "Please." He sat. Patricia introduced herself and placed a summary document in front of him. "My client, Marisol Navarro, is bringing a formal claim against Navarro Fleet Services for unpaid equity contribution and unjust enrichment," Patricia said. "The documentation before you covers a 6-year period of quantified operational contribution, including specific revenue impact, cost recovery, and contract preservation work, none of which was compensated at a level commensurate with its value or recognized through any formal equity arrangement." My father looked at the summary. Then he looked at me. "You're doing this," he said. I reached into my folder. I produced the first document, the compliance remediation record, the one that had saved the Cielo Fresh contract, and placed it on the table in front of him. Then the second, the parts inventory audit, $9,000 in duplicate billings with receipts attached. Then the third, the maintenance software implementation case, with the 18% downtime reduction figure sourced from our own operational data. One at a time. Placed flat. No drama in the motion. "I've been doing this for 6 years, I said. "You work for the company," he said. "You're paid." "I'm paid a salary that Patricia's assessment places at 62% of market rate for the scope of work I actually perform," I said. "And I hold no equity in a company that my labor has materially sustained and grown. That's the claim." He was quiet for a moment. "This is because of the wedding," he said. I squared my copy of the folder on the table before I answered. "This is because of Bakersfield," I said. He looked up. "You drove to a trucking association meeting in March and you told me I would be bored," I said. "I was 19 years old and studying logistics and you told me I would be bored. I have thought about that morning every year since. That's where this starts. The wedding is where it ends." My father looked at Patricia. "What are the figures?" he said. Patricia slid the quantified assessment across the table. I watched my father read it, and I saw the exact moment the number on the third page registered in his face. The claim totaled $2.3 million in unpaid equity contribution across 6 years, calculated against market rate compensation differential, documented revenue impact, and a proportional equity stake in the company's current valuation that Patricia's firm had assessed at $4.1 million based on audited financials. My father set the document down. "This will destroy the company," he said. "The proposed resolution doesn't require liquidation," Patricia said. "My client is seeking a formal equity stake of 22%, a salary adjustment to market rate retroactive to the current fiscal year, and a one-time settlement payment of $380,000 against the historical differential. The company continues to operate. The structure remains intact." "Tomas," my father said quietly, as though recalibrating something. "Tomas can keep his title," I said. "I'm not asking for his title. I'm asking for what I built to be recognized." There was a long silence. Patricia did not fill it. My father looked at me across the table, and I looked back at him, and I chose the pieces carefully, the way I had always chosen my words in rooms that belonged to him. "You told me I handled the paperwork side of things," I said. "That was at Tomas's birthday dinner in October 2018. I had spent that Saturday doing the compliance remediation that saved the Cielo Fresh contract. You told T.O. Bernardo I handled the paperwork." He said nothing. "You told the Cielo Fresh account manager that the operational improvements were the result of better leadership at the management level," I said. "That was December 2020, after I built and implemented the maintenance platform that reduced downtime by 18%. You had promoted Tomas 4 months before." Still nothing. "You told me to give it some time when I asked about my path in the restructured organization," I said. "February of this year. I had written the benchmarking report the restructuring was based on. You said let's get through the busy season. I have been getting through the busy season since 2017. I paused. The room was very still. "I want you to understand what I was doing during those seasons," I said. "While you were telling T.O. Bernardo I handled paperwork, I was completing the compliance remediation. While you were crediting better leadership to the account manager, I was managing the maintenance software rollout from a treatment chair. While you were telling me to give it some time, I was keeping the operational foundation of this company functioning well enough that it could afford to promote someone else." My father's hands were flat on the table. He was looking at them. "I kept working," I said. "Every time. I kept showing up, and I kept building things, and I kept saving them in a folder on a hard drive because some part of me knew this day was coming, even when I didn't want to believe it." I closed my copy of the folder. "Patricia will handle everything from here," I said. "I don't need anything else from this meeting." I stood. I picked up my bag. I did not look at my father again as I left the conference room. The lobby opened onto a street where the afternoon light was flat and warm, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and felt the specific weight of 6 years lifting. Not all at once, but gradually, the way a room clears after a long winter. The fallout came over the following 10 days. Tomas texted on the 3rd day. "Dad told me. You really went and did this." I read it and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and did not reply. My mother called on the 5th day. She said she was very hurt. She said that what Tomas had done at the wedding was just a joke, that I was too sensitive, and that this was not the way you handled family matters. I let her finish. "I know this is hard to hear," I said. "I hope in time it makes more sense." She said, "Your father built that company from nothing." "I know," I said. "I built a lot of it too." She did not have an answer for that. We said goodbye. The settlement was finalized 11 weeks later, in January, through a mediated agreement that Patricia described as favorable on every material point. 22% equity, the salary adjustment, and a settlement figure of $340,000, $40,000 less than the initial ask, which Patricia had anticipated and accounted for in the original number. The company continued operating. My father and I did not speak at the signing. We signed on the same document on different days. I still go to the yard sometimes. I have a seat at the table now in the formal sense. Board observer rights, quarterly financial reviews, a standing invitation to operational meetings. It is a different kind of presence than the one I spent 6 years trying to earn through proximity and labor, and the accumulated hope that being useful enough would eventually be the same as being valued. It is not the same thing. I understand that now. The wig, the one Tomas pulled off at my wedding, I still have it. I wear a different one now, lighter, because my hair came back thicker than it was before treatment. But I kept the one from the wedding in the box where I keep things I am not ready to put away. Not because of what happened to it, but because I remember standing in front of the mirror in the bridal suite and pinning it back into place, and I remember that I walked back out. Sometimes that is what it looks like. Not the confrontation at the table, not the documents placed flat in front of someone who has spent years looking past you. Sometimes it looks like standing in a mirror for 60 seconds and deciding you are going back in. If there is someone in your life who has spent years making themselves essential to something that refuses to put their name on it, share this with them. Not to make them angry. Just so they know they are not alone in what that costs. This story is a fictional dramatization created for entertainment purposes. Names, events, characters, and details are entirely invented and do not represent real individuals or actual events.